Good day, grade 6s. I hope that you are all well and that you're keeping safe. And I hope that you're keeping warm. It's freezing out there. So today's topic, we're going to talk about saturated solutions. But before we start with saturated solutions, we need to look at soluble particles. So when we think of soluble particles, I want you to think of the word soluble. Soluble meaning it is able to dissolve. So soluble would be things like salt in water and sugar in water. So this is a solution where the substance is able to dissolve. So now in a solution, the salt is the solute and the water is the solvent. Now when the salt dissolves in the water, it seems as if the salt just disappears. But it leaves a little bit of something behind. It leaves a taste of the salt in the substance. Now remember, we have mixed salt and water, two different substances. One of them is a solid and the other a liquid. But by making a mixture, they have now become a solution. Why? Because it has completely dissolved. Now the solute, which is the salt, particles are spread in between the particles of water, and remember the water is the solvent. So we're going to take a deeper look at soluble particles. And now you would have looked at the picture. So soluble meaning it dissolves. Okay, so we have a solution where two substances have become one. But there is a little bit of it still in there. It makes a change to the solution. So the substances become a new substance and we call it a solution. Soluble meaning it dissolves. Now, when we look at this diagram on this slide, you will see in the one beaker we have the water particles. Now remember, the water particles are the liquid, but we also know it as the solvent. Then we have a teaspoon of salt particles. Now the salt particles will be the solvent, the one that needs to dissolve into the solvent. Now, then it goes to the next beaker, which has salt and water particles. Now these salt and water particles have become one, they have merged and they have mixed between one another. So we have our solid and our liquid, they have become one to make a solution, but we call this a soluble solution or soluble particles. Then salt particles move into the spaces between the water particles, and that is how we see soluble particles. So when the salt, meaning the solute, is dissolved in water, the solvent, the salt is no longer visible. It's as if it disappears. But we need to remember it hasn't disappeared. It's just become a new solution. Remember now, if we taste that water, it's going to be salty. Now that doesn't sound good to me. Salt and chips, yummy, that sounds good. But salty water? That's something the dentist gives you to make your teeth look better and healthy. So, the salt particles are then dispersed between the water particles. Remember, they are dispersed, they become one and create something else. Now remember guys, the substances in a solution cannot be separated by physical means. When I talk about physical means, that is things like hand sorting, sieving, filtering, settling and decanting. Now remember, this is important. A solution cannot be separated like that. A solution can only be separated by using evaporation, meaning boiling. Isn't that interesting? So if we boil the salt in the water solution, we would actually be able to get the salt away from the water, because the water will evaporate and the salt will remain behind. So we're now going to take a look at a saturated solution. Now a saturated solution, if we break it up, when the particles of a solute spread throughout the particles of a solvent, we say the solute dissolves in the solvent. This is called a solution. Now, if more and more solute, in this case we could think about salt, if more and more salt is added to the solvent, the water, it is mixed into a solution. The solute begins to settle at the bottom because the solute is too much for the solvent. It cannot be dissolved much more. So now that is when we say it has become a saturated solution. It's saturated. You are putting too much solute in the solvent. More solute can be dissolved in a solvent that is heated than in a cold solvent. So in actual fact, grade 6s, if we take one beaker with cold water and we add salt and we add salt, eventually the substance, the solution, would become saturated. Now if we heated that beaker up, we would actually be able to add more salt, as remember, it would evaporate. Now if we had another beaker and we just used cold water and we added the solute and we added it more and more salt, that is when it would stay saturated. We would have to heat it up to have a change occur. So a saturated solution is one that has no more space. There's no more space of any more particles of the solute. There's no more space for them, and that is when it has become a saturated solution. So the solute will settle to the bottom and it won't dissolve anymore because there's just no space for those particles. Grade 6s, we're now going to do an experiment just to intrigue your mind about saturated solutions. So, for this experiment, I would like you to look at Activity 9 on page 80. So, it says, make a saturated solution of salt. So for this experiment, you will need a jar of water. Now, you're supposed to fill it half full, but I think Ma'am put a little bit too much, but it's okay. Then, you will need some salt, any brand of salt, it doesn't matter, and a teaspoon. So what we are going to do in this experiment is we're going to test saturation. Now, we know that here we have water, so it's a liquid, and this is not a mixture at all. It's just a substance. And here we have salt, which, remember grade 6s, is just a substance. We have not made a mixture and we have not made a solution. So remember, liquid is our one substance, which is water, our solvent, remember solvent, and then the salt, which is a solid, and that's our solute. Okay, so what we're going to do, we are now going to put 1 teaspoon of the solute in the solvent, and we're going to stir. Now remember, just going to stir and show you, and then stir some more. So how a saturated solution occurs is once you've added more and more and more and more salt, it eventually becomes saturated. There's no more space. But for now, I would like you to see remember, we mixed our two substances, a liquid and a solid, a solvent and a solute, and it's now, remember, become a solution. Okay. And it's changed color. But you cannot see any salt at the bottom. Yes, it's changed color, but let's continue. So we're now going to add another teaspoon. So this is the second teaspoon of salt, and we're going to stir. So very important, grade 6s. The next topic we're going to talk about dissolving. Remember, the salt is dissolving in the liquid. Alright, so that's 2 teaspoons. Now we put a third. And remember, we stir. Now remember, the stirring helps the solvent to disperse and to dissolve. So that's important, and you'll know why in the next lesson. So, if you can see in the camera, this water is soaking up this salt, so it's loving it. We cannot yet see any salt settle. So this is still a solution. Now we put the next amount of salt in. I think we're on how many teaspoons now? The 4th one. Stir some more. And still no salt at the bottom. So we put another teaspoon. And we stir some more. Now, grade 6s, I hope you can see that the water is going whitish and it's turning more and more white. But yet, there's still no salt that has settled. So I'm going to put in another teaspoon of salt and another one, and I'm going to stir. Just going to leave it a little bit and see what's happening. Okay, now at the bottom you'll see it's a little bit more white than the top. So you can see there's a little bit of settling, but let's put some more salt inside. Remember, we have to wait for the point of the solution becoming saturated. So it's not yet at the saturated point. Okay, let's just wait a little bit. So if you look now, grade 6s, we are at the saturated point of the solution. And how we know this is at the bottom, there's a thick layer of salt. It's very white, where the top is whitish and milky. So I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer. I don't know if you can see that. The salt has now stopped dissolving. Okay. So if I take the teaspoon inside, can you see that the salt has stopped dissolving? And there we have salt. So the salt has stopped dissolving, and we have reached the saturated point. See if we can maybe get a little bit more in there. Okay. So that now shows you the saturated point. So grade 6s, I hope that you enjoyed that experiment. Now, I know there was no boom pow chow, but we need to remember science is not always about the explosions. Sometimes science is just a simple experiment to test a theory and to help us understand the work. So now we spoke about a saturated solution. Remember, saturated solution is when you have a solute, the salt, and a solvent, the water. it becomes a solution, and then you add more salt, and the more salt you add, eventually the substance becomes saturated, meaning no more, no more. You can't add any more salt to that solution as it stops dissolving. So, stop, wait, and listen. Check how cool this looks. Now I'll let this mixture settle a little, and wow, boy oh boy, look at how amazing that looks. This is a perfect example of a saturated solution. The salt has completely settled at the bottom of the jar. So this is what we call a saturated solution. The solution could not absorb any more salt. How amazing is that? Thank you for attending this wonderful online class. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me on the WhatsApp group, Google Classroom, or any other way you can get hold of me. Just know I miss you all very much. Stay safe.